Almost 1 in 5 children in the world live in areas affected by war. To all of them, we dedicate this podcast.
As vozes do professor.
أصوات المعلمون.
老師有話兒.
Teachers' voices.
Welcome to a new episode of Teachers' Voices. I'm your host, Nina Alonso, and today we are talking about teaching and learning under adverse conditions. I'm finding out about an EdTech solution that uses a play-based approach to develop a digitalized learning program that adapts to children's changing learning conditions called Can't Wait to Learn. I want to use today's conversations to reflect on the importance of the learning conditions surrounding children. For me, learning conditions are especially critical for children living in zones affected by war. As we heard in the opening, many children are dealing with the stress and anxiety of armed conflicts right now. With the help of today's guests, I'm going to explore how EdTech can adapt to the changing needs and circumstances of children learning under adverse conditions, and how important it is to collect data and gather evidence around these solutions so that EdTech can really support teachers' work in providing a human-centered education and helping children thrive in difficult circumstances. I have just come back from my morning walk with my dog Indy in the Retiro Park. On our way back home, the sidewalks of Madrid city center were crowded with school children, probably going to visit a museum. And Indy had to greet them all, stretching her legs in downward-facing dog and opening her jaw while barking as if she wanted to say something. I think she believes she's a girl, actually. We took a long time, and I was so glad to leave behind the busy streets and get back in the calm and warmth of my cozy apartment when I realized, I might have forgotten something important, as Indy is staring at me, wagging her tail, probably wondering why this podcast host doesn't know about Labrador's priorities anymore. Come on. I had forgotten to feed her. No wonder she did not go under the table, as she always does when she sees I'm getting set for recording. So, okay, I stopped to feed her. So let's get started now. To understand more about teaching and learning while being affected by war, today I'm talking to Jasmine Turner and Olena Onyshchenko, who both work for War Child, and then to teachers in Ukraine who are using War Child's Can't Wait to Learn EdTech solution to support Ukrainian primary school children. Let's start our journey in Uganda to pay a visit to Jasmine. She welcomes me in Kampala. Jasmine, thanks for connecting with me. How are you?
Hi, Nina. I'm good, thanks. I'm in Kampala right now in our offices here, the War Child offices. And I have to warn you that the clouds are getting darker and darker. So there's definitely going to be a downpour in the next hour or so. But hopefully not while we're speaking.
Fingers crossed. I would like to start by asking you to tell me about the learning conditions of children who live in zones affected by conflict, so we can try to understand their needs in terms of teaching supports.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. I think that there are a number of things that are important to keep in mind with children's ability to learn and what might influence that during conflict or adverse conditions. Of course, we need to keep in mind like children's socio-emotional state, their well-being, how are they feeling, how are they managing everything that's going on around them. I think in order for that, the provision of learning needs to be very flexible in terms of the modality that it's provided by. Classrooms might not be available, for example. Teachers might not be available. And we also need to keep in mind the people around the child themselves, like their parents, their teachers. They are probably feeling that same stress that children are feeling. So ideally, that education provision is also in some way not putting an additional burden on parents, on teachers. Overall, it should be something supporting everybody rather than adding to their stress.
I read that War Child developed a program called Can't Wait to Learn in response to that need for flexible provision of educational support. Could you describe that program?
Yeah, so Can't Wait to Learn is a digitized personal learning program In every country where it's implemented, it's aligned with the national curriculum and approved by the relevant body within the government who's responsible for curriculum. It's a competency appropriate learning model, so it adapts to the level of the child, and it's self-paced, which means that children progress through content as they master more basic concepts. So it really goes along at the pace of the child. In the past, it's been delivered on tablets, and it consists of these mini games, which are for children to practice these skills and knowledge that they've learned through instructional videos, which are actually videos of adults and children from the countries where the program is implemented, explaining these concepts to the child who's playing the game. And then it also has this game world and characters and stories, which provide this kind of narrative behind the actual academic learning.
Later on, we will hear more about the current use of this game in the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, but as the learning solution has adapted to Ukraine after success elsewhere, I would like to know about the setting in which the learning program was initially designed.
It was initially developed in Sudan, in really rural communities, and that's where it was used on tablets. Since then, in the majority of other countries where Can't Wait to Learn is used, so that includes Chad, Uganda, Lebanon, and Jordan, it's also used on tablets. And then the tablets are used in classrooms in formal schools or in informal settings as well. So it was developed for very low resource settings. So having a huge reliance on internet or something just wasn't an option when designing the game. So it uses a small amount of internet, usually by project officers hotspotting their phones or using MiFis. That's just to download the game data. When we started the development for the Ukraine version of the game, we actually developed an app version. So then it doesn't have to be necessarily a tablet. It's a little bit more of a flexible modality of implementation.
Teachers' Voices is dedicated to bridging research and practice in education so that researchers and teachers can learn from each other. I have been lucky enough to wear both the researcher and the teacher hat in the past. And as a teacher, before trying any education solution, I always wanted to know more about the evidence behind it. Can you tell us about the research and the evidence you have gathered? Can't Wait to Learn in Ukraine is helping War Child to think about ways to scale up the use of the Can't Wait to Learn games in other settings. What adaptations to the game could benefit children in other contexts?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, careful what you ask for, because I'm sure you know that as a researcher, I could go on and on and on and on about evidence. I mean, it's been almost 7 years now that I'm working as a researcher on this program. So yeah, and I'm more than happy to speak about the evidence. So actually last year, we just finished a randomized control trial that really evaluated the effectiveness of Can't Wait to Learn compared to formal education in Uganda. And in this evaluation, Can't Wait to Learn was really embedded within formal education, so kind of integrated into the timetable. And as I'm sure you know, an RCT is gold standard level evidence of effectiveness, and it demonstrated really positive findings. So both for literacy and for numeracy, children doing Can't Wait to Learn integrated into their lessons outperformed children doing normal education. So we found this really encouraging, and it really demonstrated gains for those foundational skills like letter knowledge, phonemic awareness, things like that.
Foundational literacy and numeracy are the building blocks of further learning, but you mentioned at the beginning that an important aspect is that these children face a lot of stress because they are learning under adverse conditions. So have you also collected data about children's social and emotional well-being?
Yeah, thanks. So yeah, the content is the first 3 years of primary school. So it's predominantly on that foundational learning for literacy and numeracy. There is, however, there's an aspect of the program that's also around social-emotional learning. I mentioned these characters before, and these characters have backstories, and by the child completing the games, then the child is also helping these characters achieve their goals and things. And so actually, I was glad that you had this question, because when we talk about effectiveness, we're often so focused on learning games, and without a doubt, they're important. But we've actually got a lot of other evidence on other aspects of development that the program supports children with. It boosts self-confidence, motivation to go to school, children supporting each other, children also competing with each other. So it has that play-based kind of competition style. We always measure well-being as one of our outcomes, and that's part of War Child's kind of more overarching focus on children's resilience and well-being, and acknowledging that access and learning within the education sector contributes to that resilience and well-being. So that's what we collect, but we also do really in-depth interviews and focus group discussions with children and teachers and caregivers to ensure that we have that kind of holistic understanding of what's the impact of the Can't Wait to Learn program.
I like this strong focus on children's well-being. On our previous episode, we started discussing students' well-being with teachers from different contexts, and we also discussed current research in schools on students' well-being with the International Baccalaureate. Would the Can't Wait to Learn games also help children in other learning settings?
This program is not only something that works with conflict-affected populations, though it was really with them in mind that it was designed. We've seen that Can't Wait to Learn works in formal schools as well as other settings. So I think actually, if you look at more global goals, for example, like Sustainable Development Goals, achieving learning equality, I think that Can't Wait to Learn can play an important role in those. And I think what it really comes down to is those design features that I mentioned at the beginning, the fact that children channel into the game at their own level and then proceed through it only once they've really solidified those foundational skills. I think that it can work in a whole number of settings.
Jasmine, I believe teachers are key players in supporting children's learning and well-being. How do you involve teachers in implementing this program?
Yeah, absolutely. We work really, really, really closely with teachers, but also the whole management structure around teachers, so that there's that support around the teacher, because it is a new modality to take on. Sometimes it's during the teacher training that is the first time that a teacher interacts with a tablet. So we have a comprehensive training on how to implement Can't Wait to Learn, but also going into how do you integrate EdTech into teaching and learning, because it shouldn't be that EdTech replaces the teacher. It should be that EdTech is a tool for the teacher to use to help themselves, to help their teaching. And then we provide this ongoing mentorship for the teachers.
I am glad that you highlight this human-centered approach to technology in education. This is a common thread throughout this podcast, actually, and we have discussed it in our previous episodes about EdTech and artificial intelligence in teaching and learning. How did Can't Wait to Learn adapt to the Ukrainian context, when Ukrainian children and teachers were already suffering the consequences of an armed conflict?
The main thing that changed for Ukraine was the delivery modality. So it being an app rather than this pre-installed program on a tablet. I think that was really interesting because the new approach, it's still responding to those needs within conflict settings, for example, schools being closed, and it's more applicable than a tablet version to a mobile population, which of course is a common effect of conflict, that the populations are displaced. In terms of the evidence that we're collecting from Ukraine, it predominantly focuses on the reach, on children's engagement with the game, and it's very much informing our scaling strategy and thinking behind that. So also exploring, let's say, you would think of as maybe non-traditional actors within education, like private companies, and what can their role be in supporting such a program? What does implementation without teachers or facilitators look like, for example?
Thank you for these insights, Jasmine. We now leave Jasmine in Uganda and travel north to Europe, where Olena is waiting for me. Olena is the project lead of the Can't Wait to Learn program for Ukraine.
Hi, Nina. It's a pleasure and honor for me to be interviewed by you. I'm based in the Netherlands and I'm enjoying at the moment a very rainy weather, as ever in the Netherlands seems to be. It's actually a very comfortable temperature because at home in Ukraine, it's -3 today. Technically, every second month I'm in Ukraine. I'm working off home today, so it's nice to be inside and to be warm. When it's not raining, I really enjoy walking a lot. So I'm not really a biker, though it's funny. In the Netherlands, everybody seems to be biking. It seems like they're just a natural continuation of a bike. Something for me to learn here. Ukraine is a pretty peculiar situation for education in emergencies, and War Child and Can't Wait to Learn Global had to learn a lot about new circumstances in which the war can be happening. The main difference, I would say, is that the Ukrainian education system did not collapse when the war started. Before the war started, we had 1.6 million children attached to the education system, so studying in the primary school, and 79,000 of primary school teachers. Almost 2 years of war have gone. We have 1.4 million Ukrainian children studying in the primary schools in Ukraine, either abroad or inside Ukraine, and also 79,000 of the teachers in the primary school. So you can see by these figures that the system has survived. But then the needs definitely are changing because despite of the fact that the children and teachers remained in the system, the circumstances of studying changed significantly.
Olena, many Ukrainian citizens have left Ukraine since the war started almost 2 years ago, but the figures of school attendance haven't changed much. Is it because the children who left Ukraine are still enrolled in the Ukrainian school system? This brings to mind a Ukrainian friend of mine who lives in Madrid and whose children go to the Spanish school, but also attend Ukrainian classes on Saturdays, with other Ukrainian children, of course.
Yes, it's a pretty common situation. Sometimes children study in 2 schools at the same time, so they attend the local schools in the local language, wherever they were evacuated to. Then they study in the Ukrainian school. When the parents are expecting to go back to Ukraine, they understand that the children have to be hooked up to the Ukrainian education to be able to re-enter the system as soon as they return.
Olena, I saw that you work with different partners, including a local NGO, but mainly you work with the Ministry of Education, right?
The fastest way to reach the children in emergency is to go through the system of education. What we needed to change is that going through the education system, it means that you have to adapt to the national curriculum. So our game was already competencies-based and achieving the targets of the primary education a year by year, but then we had to adapt it strongly to the Ukrainian national curriculum. For instance, Ukrainian national curriculum has 4 years of studies in the primary school. So we have 4 grades. And initially, the game was designed for 3 years. At the same time, the number of the lessons is also very different. And then we had also to adapt our competencies-based game to the main lessons in the Ukrainian curriculum with the topics and examples and solutions, what the kids had to do, the mini games they had to do. Another peculiarity of Ukraine, as distinct from the previous countries that Can't Wait to Learn was working in, Ukraine, compared to other countries we dealt with, is much more saturated with the devices and thus with video game usage. So we're competing with other video games. So we need to be more sophisticated to win the attention of the kids and then to keep the attention of the kids. That also brings a huge challenge to us.
I saw that at War Child, you often refer to the Can't Wait to Learn EdTech solution as a game, so the playful element seems quite central in the adaptations made for Ukraine, even though it is tailored for the national curriculum, right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, because this is the principle as during the war context, and especially the live war context, which again, a War Child is dealing with introducing this EdTech solution in the market during the live war, which is happening for the first time in the history of Can't Wait to Learn. But the game is essential because it's the less stressful type of learning. And the kids in any war, and in the war in Ukraine, they undergo enough stress and even trauma in their general life. So this is why we are trying to make learning as less stressful as possible. And actually, the system of education, the ministry, as a representative of the teachers and the kids in Ukraine, they actually share this approach. Here, we open the possibility to learn through the games being downloaded either on iPhone or Android or tablet or gadget. And we even had to come up with a solution for desktop versions for Windows, because we had to learn that 90% of the students and teachers in Ukraine use computers for their learning processes. But we can't measure the learning outcome yet. This is where we expect the help of our R&D department. And when the game is totally institutionalized, then we will be able to run a research and see the results in terms of learning.
Do you think the adaptations that the Can't Wait to Learn game has made for Ukraine could benefit children in other contexts?
If there are partners like in Ukraine, a lot of devices were brought in by different donors or nonprofit organizations, and they actually have improved the accessibility to the education in emergencies in Ukraine a lot. So maybe in combination of additional distribution of devices in the other countries we're working at, we can also introduce this game much wider, because now it's only an app. It doesn't have to be a specific particular gadget you download it to. It can be any device that is existing in the home or can be delivered to the homes of kids by the donors. But I think there's also a lot of benefits in the architecture of the game now. Despite of the various challenges, the game has made us learn that there are things that we can do and adapt to circumstances very fast. The more we are open to the new opportunities, the more we can do it better, even money-wise, for other countries too. And especially in the terms of outreach, it's a tremendous opportunity. It's multiplying by tens, by hundreds, by thousands, potentially, the kids that will have access to this game.
We are now going to travel to Ukraine, where two teachers will tell us about their experiences teaching during the war. We first arrived near Kiev to meet Juliana Dovopol. Hello, Juliana. Thanks so much for accepting my invitation and for your time. Can you describe your teaching context?
Hello, nice to meet you. Before the war and during the war, I didn't leave Ukraine. I am currently living in the village of Kozin, which is located almost near Kyiv. Sometimes I hear very loud sounds when there is a missile attack or rocket attack or shaheds are coming. We hear how they are shot down, and near the neighboring villages or cities there may be flights or even debris. We sometimes go to shelter, but since it is far away, we stay at home and use the rule of 2 safe walls.
Juliana is one of the teachers that the Can't Wait to Learn program is supporting as they continue to teach children, both when they are in school without interruptions, but also when the consequences of war affect the school.
Regarding the school, we have a shelter. It is located next to our school building, literally 100 or 200 meters. When we hear the sound of the siren, we immediately go down to the shelter. The pupils take with them only an emergency suitcase in which there are snacks, a water bottle. We have 2 or 3 minutes to go to a building shelter and go down to a safe place. This is a shelter in which each sector of the room is divided for classes so that you have your own place with students where you can continue your studies that were in the classroom. To the shelter, we don't take any notebooks with us. That is why the students have phones. Can't Wait to Learn simply save us, especially during air raids. When we are in shelter and even give entertainment, we can repeat other previous topics, continuing it on the phone. It pleases that this apps is created in the format of a game. It's very funny, clever, and really continue lessons of school on the shelter building, but on the phone. It's very easy for pupils.
It is interesting that an engaging and entertaining learning app can help to distract children during very stressful situations. Juliana says that the app is also useful when they are able to follow normal classes because it is tailored to the Ukrainian curriculum but simplifies the content and delivers it through playful ways.
The school program can be complicated, yes. And the simplified application is ideal. A big advantage is that the videos and games are adapted to the teacher's methodical material, that is, it absolutely corresponds to the order of the topic studied at school. I personally like the app Can't Wait to Learn as a teacher because it makes it easier for me to check the tasks because the students do it there and directly work on the mistakes, and it improves my lessons because I use various remote and online materials to make it interesting to study mathematics and the Ukrainian language. When learning new material, students really like playing video tasks. We use the application in the mathematics lessons when we repeat the learned material with the help of games instead of some writing task and watching videos.
What Juliana shares with us is in line with Oksana Konstyuchenko's insights, a teacher at the School of Superheroes, who also teaches primary school Ukrainian children, but in a hospital. Let's hear from Oksana.
Я Оксана, вчитель початкових класів школи супергероїв, місто Дніпро.
My name is Oksana. I'm a teacher of the elementary school of superheroes in the Dnipro city. This means that our students are not at school desks, but in hospital beds. My task is to ensure that this period of their life is complete in terms of learning, communication, and emotional support. We want to create a space where, no matter what, there is a room to just be a child, where you can break away from procedures, diagnoses, and the terrible reality of war, which unfortunately affected the lives of children from both big cities and small villages. We hospital teachers, perhaps like no other, face the problem of organizing the educational process with children of different levels of training at school, and often also with gaps in education that widened after a full-scale invasion. With the beginning of a full-scale war, children lost the opportunity to attend school, and education was transferred to an online format. Due to blackouts, change of residence, missile attacks, most children did not have the opportunity to join the lessons. Thanks to Can't Wait to Learn, which does not depend on the internet availability or connectivity, students always have the opportunity to make up for missed topics. The organization of the educational process became much more complicated due to constant air raid alerts. I have some very good examples of how the app can support learning and recovery of students, especially in long-term hospital settings. My student Ilya was undergoing treatment after neurosurgery and had problems with memory recovery, which also resulted in significant educational losses. He was a student of the 4th grade, but did not remember the program of the 3rd grade. The workbook and textbooks did not motivate him to study, and we decided to try learning with the help of Can't Wait to Learn. Ilya and myself, we mastered the application together. It was my first experience of working with Can't Wait to Learn. It motivated Ilya very much to work on the gadget. He listened carefully to my explanation of the topic every time, realizing that it makes it easier for him to complete further tasks in the application. He was very happy with the game's score points and tried not to lose a single fruit while completing the final tasks. When we discussed an application with some colleagues during the training sessions, they said that some tasks have a lot of repetition. In this case, with Ilya, it was very beneficial. The second case of very successful use of the application that I would like to share with you, it's with a girl named Vika. She was undergoing treatment in the oncohematology department. Children who are on long-term treatment in the oncology department have frequent mood swings. And the girl was in the hospital for almost a year and had almost no contact with others, only with her mother. the first lessons that we had were not successful at all. They were basically my monologue with no feedback from Vika. I understood that textbooks did not stand a chance. So I came to classes with interesting tasks and colorful printouts. There was some progress, but very insignificant. Having some successful experience with the application, I decided to try using it with Vika as well. And she liked it very much, got very quickly engaged, and really did her best to complete the tasks so that she could proceed at the game.
I find it very inspiring to listen to Oksana's commitment, how she puts the child at the center of her teaching work, and to realize what this means in an environment like a hospital. I like how she seems to be all the time seeking for flexible ways to adapt to the changing needs, mainly the emotional needs also of children receiving hospital care, without forgetting that she and her students are also in a war zone. I must say that I'm really humbled by the testimonials of these courageous Ukrainian teachers. Teaching is inherently a demanding job, let alone in the midst of violence and armed conflict. And if I don't highlight often enough why this podcast is devoted to raise the voice and the status of the teaching profession, then now is probably a good moment to do so. I truly believe that teaching profession has a pivotal role to play in transforming society. In Teachers' Voices, we hear about the stories of great committed teachers to show how positive the impact of teachers can be in children's learning and development. But I want to say that I'm also aware, as a mother, as a former teacher, as a teacher training and as a researcher, that I have also encountered teachers whose training attitudes or commitment were somehow deceiving, and that can also leave an imprint and probably not that good. So for me, this only makes me believe more in the need to invest in teachers' capacity building, in motivation and their well-being, and sharing these stories of commitment, particularly listening about teachers like Oksana and Juliana who work under very adverse conditions, is key to acknowledge why we need to listen to teachers more and how their stories can inform the action we need to transform education for a more peaceful world. Let's hear from Jasmine about how EdTech can help children learn in adverse conditions.
I think that the importance of this really comes from this question around what is the role of EdTech in providing education when the usual models of providing education, like in schools with teachers, so on, when those are not possible.
The learning conditions of children affected by war vary from one context to another. Learning opportunities that effectively support these children and their educators need to account for these differences. For instance, children in Ukraine might have more access to video games, technology, and internet connectivity than children in other contexts where organizations like War Child operate. Despite these differences, social and emotional support are needed for all in these learning ecosystems. An effective approach that both research and practice report as fruitful is learning through play. Also, all children affected by war need access to flexible solutions that are self-paced and adaptive. Because of its simplicity, play-based approach, adaptability, but also rigorous monitoring and evaluation, EdTech, like Can't Wait to Learn, helps children and teachers in Ukraine to cope with the challenging conditions of an armed conflict. So I asked for the link, and I even experienced it myself. So I wanted to play a bit. I think it's very interesting, this play-based approach, and I actually wanted to play more with that. But, the Ukrainian app is in Ukrainian, and it's not so easy for me to use. But I can just get a sense of how it works. Thanks for listening to Teachers' Voices. You can find more about War Child, about Can't Wait to Learn, and about our guests in the show notes and on Vault.expert. Stay tuned for our coming episode in celebration of International Day of Education. Don't forget to follow us on the different podcast platforms and engage with us on social media or join our WhatsApp group.